Hi everybody, my name is Jeremy Siskind. I am the author of Playing Solo Jazz Piano, Solo Standards for Piano, and 3 books worth of jazz piano fundamentals. And this is a special time of year. We're celebrating the birthday of Fred Hersch. It's his 70th birthday this year. Fred did write the introduction to playing solo jazz piano, and he has been my piano mentor for, 20 years now. Just a huge influence in my life personally and musically, and we're just so happy that he is around making great music and inspiring all of us. So I have a little list of some of the ways that Fred Hersch has changed jazz piano. So let's dive in. The first one is a focus on a light touch. And, certainly a lot of pianists had a light, beautiful touch. Wow, this is going great from an effects standpoint. Before Fred, Teddy Wilson is somebody who comes to mind as just having this light, beautiful touch. But something changed with Fred's touch, and light touch came absolutely into style. 2 pianists who I think of as kind of embodying this touch are Glenn Zaleski and Sullivan Fortner, but we could name a lot more who are choosing, and certainly they have a lot of variety in their touch, but who are choosing to play with this beautiful, even sound throughout the instrument. And I know very firsthand that Fred is obsessed with touch. He's obsessed with gesture of exactly how do you move into the piano to get the most beautiful and intentional possible sound. So that is certainly one of the first things on my list. Second thing on the list is counterpoint. Okay, counterpoint, is the musical idea that we can form harmony through combining and stacking multiple melodies. And to some degree, counterpoint is always present, but sometimes counterpoint is more obvious than others. And in Fred's music, it's often very obvious. And Fred is a master of counterpoint, and he thinks in these kind of chorale style melodies that move between his hands. And you'll often hear just 2 voices or just 3 voices in his playing. For instance, let's take, I'm not going to be able to pull out a transcription instantly, but I want you to hear what I'm talking about. If I'm playing There Will Never Be Another You, I could play it. Right, I'm totally just playing 2 melodies, not nearly as well as Fred does, but it's this kind of style that makes us call Fred's music contrapuntal, but also thicker textures. Right, and he can improvise beautiful 3 and 4 note counterpoint, which is really difficult to do, and not many people can do it. Brad Meldau is certainly another person in the jazz piano world that is known for improvising counterpoint, and Brad was a student of Fred's, and I don't think that's totally a coincidence. They certainly have some different influences as well, but I think it is very important to note that that there's that connection. I think this is really important in Fred's music, which is that he combines the beautiful with the avant-garde. And maybe this is something we could say about some other people like Paul Boulez or Keith Jarrett, but Fred is somebody who can break your heart with a ballad. He does have this investment in this really pretty piano tone, but he's also incredibly exploratory. And when he chooses people to work with, he often chooses people from the more free jazz scene, people like Tony Malaby, Ralph Alessi, Drew Gress, and Sheet Waits, who they're not going to be playing standards, but he brings them in, and Fred kind of belongs to both worlds to some degree. like I said, he could play a jazz standard in a way that will just make your jaw drop, but he can also freely improvise. And he, I think, has brought the two worlds together in a way that's been really important and really influential going forward. And a nice album to hear this is that Fred Hersch Trio Plus 2 album, where he does feature Ralph Alessi and Tony Malaby. And they're playing changes, they're playing forms, but I think one thing that Fred recognized is that the more avant-garde leaning players care really deeply about sound, and Fred cares really deeply about sound. And when you listen to an album like that, you hear this commitment to sound, and it's just such a pleasure because people aren't trying to burn over the changes or anything like that. They're playing fantastically, but the sound is always at the center. And I think, that's part of Fred's legacy. More than almost any pianist I can think of, Fred uses absolutely the entire piano. And I think he's kind of revolutionized how much pianists love the upper register, because Fred can just make you absolutely weep playing in the upper register. Like his piece A Lark, for instance, I can't remember what key it's in offhand. Starts with a pedal point way in the upper register. It must be a B. But he just adds such incredible sparkle to the upper register that it's reinvigorated that register's role in jazz. And speaking of counterpoint, he loves playing really split counterpoint at the two ends of the piano. Which is not a sound I could name, I couldn't name another piano record or piano player who uses that sound in particular. Probably forgetting somebody, but it's pretty unique to him. Fred introduced kind of some more classical gestures into jazz piano. And I mean that both in the sense of like a physical gesture that's being used. A lot of jazz pianists play in a very different way because of Fred's influence. But he also uses kind of classical gestures in terms of his arrangements on the piano. His grace notes are much more classical. And he uses these kind of in between the hands, I can think of. He splits the hands in these ways that aren't completely unheard of in jazz, but really have innovated so beautifully. I'm just staring, so I have all of these sheets of Fred Hersch transcriptions, Endless Stars, this is Bird in the Rain, and I was just thinking that those are two great songs to listen to for his upper register, feeling. In fact, in Bird in the Rain, I have this transcribed here. I did this when I was like in college, and he does this little bird call that goes. So pretty. Anyway, a lot more classical gestures, both physically and musically. The next one is vibrant imagery. And this might seem like a strange thing, but Fred, first of all, plays into emotions and, really accesses some emotions that we don't hear a lot of in jazz. We get a lot of jumpy and playful in Fred. We get tunes like stuttering, right? I've got that transcription right here. We've got tunes like skipping that are like so vivid and written to this emotion and to this feeling. And that's not really that common. It's become a little bit more common after him. But, a lot of jazz tunes are just kind of like about hanging out at a jazz club. So with the tunes he's written, with the emotions that he plays with, and also the ways that he has combined with poetry. He's put out a lot of albums. For instance, the one that probably sticks out the most is the Walt Whitman album. But he's put out other albums which involve lyricists, which involve words, and which are really quite moving, not just because of the music, but because he's contending with some emotional things that are a little deeper than jazz musicians are used to contending with. And those of you who know Fred's biography might know that he has had real brushes with death throughout his life. And maybe it's for that reason. Maybe it's just because he's kind of I wouldn't call him a intellectual guy, but he does have that kind of New York intellectual. He's very curious about poetry and art and film and books. And we always were able to connect in that way. And then the most concrete way that Fred has influenced the jazz world is that he's taught so many pianists, and so many of the pianists who are most influential today. Almost every pianist I know, including many of my other teachers, have gone in for a lesson with Fred because he's someone known as having an incredibly discerning ear and being incredibly honest, which of course can sometimes be read as harsh. At Western Michigan, their nickname for him was Fred Hersch. But he's not only taught people, I want to emphasize that he was always so generous to me in terms of creating community. He would have get-togethers of pianists in his home where everybody would play for one another. He's almost always going out at night to different jazz clubs when he's in New York and hearing different musicians, hearing people, encouraging them. And he's just become a really generous colleague as well as mentor to so many of us. So if you make one goal today, listen to a Fred Hersch recording. Last time I recommended 3 of them. And let's see, there's now 2 recent ECM recordings that you should listen to. I'm trying to remember the names. I'm going to pull them up right now. Because I'm blanking on the name, but they're both beautiful, absolutely beautiful recordings. I have so many Fred Hersch recordings. I need to sift through them now. Well, I mentioned Leaves of Grass. A great recording to listen to is Live at the Jazz Standard with Fred Hersch and Nancy King. That's where I learned anything I know about vocal accompaniment. Fred Hersch Plays Jobim is beautiful, beautiful record. Silent Listening is one of the ECM records. Let me see if I find the other one in my collection. Surrounding Green is the trio record. So listen to a little bit of Fred Hersch today. Do yourself a favor and tell me a track that you like in the comments if you've watched this far. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to you later.